A couple of weeks ago when we were in Hawaii on the Sabbath, we went to a restaurant located down by the ocean. Very nice environment, atmosphere to have that. We don't have that today where we're going in Dallas, but it's great. But we were walking down from the parking area down to that area, to the restaurant, and we came across a large arbor that had gourd-type vines. They were gourd vines hanging all over it. Had gone over the entire arbor area there. And there were large gourds, probably about yay big in some cases, hanging down from it. And some of them were so large that they were holding them up by encased in a little bit of what I'd call twine or small rope. And because the weight was so heavy, they didn't want them breaking off. But anyway, from what I understood by some comments there, it's a little unusual seeing that kind of gourd there. They are grown there. And they're a type that is used in Hawaii as a percussion instrument for the traditional hula. And as we walked by and took some pictures of the gourds themselves and the plants, I couldn't help but think of Jonah. First thing popped into my mind because of what happened to him after being swallowed. He wasn't eaten, he was swallowed by the great fish and spewed out on shore, and later on had this encounter with a gourd that we're going to be talking about because we're going to go through a new series today, beginning a new series entitled Learning Through Jonah, with this being part one. Years and years and years ago when I went through the book of Jonah, and we're going to add to it a little bit more this time because there are a lot of lessons to learn from it. Jonah 1, chapter 1, verse 1. Okay? Jonah 1, verse 1. Now the word of the Eternal came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Now when you start looking some of these things up sometimes for maps and the like, there are a lot of things that have been lost through time as far as history, and especially going back to that period of time there. Trying to find locations and exactly where certain things were located or how large they were gets to be a little bit of a task. So anyway, and where that fish was when it did spew him out. But anyway, we'll come to some of that later. So God's desire was to send Jonah there to give them warning because he was going to destroy the area, and sent Jonah with that message. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Eternal. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare and went down to it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Eternal. Not a good idea to think you're going to be able to run away from God. I can't help but think of Adam and Eve in the garden, and they thought that they could get to an area or be in an area where God wouldn't see them or wouldn't be aware of them. And they didn't know what we know today, that God knows everything about us. Everything up here, everything, which is incredible. He knows our thinking, he knows our minds. It's a spirit essence that God put in mankind, and he's able to know exactly how it's working and what's going on. Incredible. So nothing is hidden from God. But his idea was to get away because he didn't want the job. He didn't want to do this. And so his idea was to flee to Tarshish. Now, I didn't realize it until I started doing a little research in this. I thought it was an area closer. He wanted to get far away. At that particular time, going back to the time of the Phoenicians and different ones and the travels that different ones had made in the world, if you go back and look at this particular area, what it says about it, most believe that it was an area of southwest Spain, because it was rich with gold and silver and all kinds of things that were there. But it may have been a lot farther because there are some ideas that shipping at that time, they'd actually gone way down into Africa and different places. And there are rich areas of gold and silver throughout the regions there as well. So we really don't know where it was. But it was a long way from Joppa. It's the farthest he could find to be able to get away as far as he could, and that was his goal, that was his desire. So he wanted to get away from the presence of the eternal. Sometimes if we're not careful as human beings, we can live our lives that way as a matter of deception, even in God's church, because I've seen it too much, where it's almost as if individuals, people have to get to a point where they either don't believe, well, they don't believe certain things anyway, but don't grasp the power of God and think that they can get by with certain things or do certain things and not pay a price, not with God, especially when once God's called someone. So again, he tried to escape what he had been called to do for God. And I, again, can't help but think of people in the church who have done the exact same thing. Escape what they've been called to do. You know, God's called us for a purpose. He's called us to become a part of his family. And not only that, but for the past 2,000 years, there have been those who have specifically been called to be a part of a great government. One that's going to be established and come with Joshua the Christ. That's incredible. I've been very inspired by going back through and writing some of those things and a few more things about it as well. But it's an awesome thing to recognize or to realize what we've been called to as a whole. Others have been called to because this is a unique time to live on into a new age, to be the foundation of the church, the beginning of the church that's just going to continue on in the millennium. But we have amongst us throughout the church those who are going to be a part of the 144,000. How many? Don't know. But that's an awesome thing to think about how many people have been called through time to be worked with by God, and to know that especially within the church in the past 2,000 years, that the majority of those who were called to that purpose have done exactly this. They've fled from God. They didn't want to do what God gave them to do. They didn't want to fulfill it. They didn't want to complete it. To me, it's absolutely mind-boggling, that kind of thinking, especially when you know the mind, the power of Almighty God. But somewhere along the line, people can begin to lose that soberness of mind, that belief, that understanding, and do, in a sense, exactly what he did, to get as far away from this way of life, from any pressures of it, because this is pressure. Now, you can have pressure in the world, or you can have pressure in God's church. That's the bottom line. Human beings go through hard things in life. It can be in the world without God, or for us, or when we've been called, it can be in the world with God. To me, that's a no-brainer. But especially when someone has known God and then goes away from it, that's even far worse. And what awaits them is not good. And many start experiencing some of those things early on, even in this age. Anyway, insanity sometimes of the human mind. So there is no escaping God. We can leave him, we can say no to him, and that's a choice. God lets us do that. With Jonah, he didn't just let him escape. He was going to make sure that Jonah finished the job he gave him to do, because we can have sermons about it. People in God's church, people through time who've been called by God, can learn from the story of what Jonah did and be admonished by it. If making the right decisions, be encouraged by it. If making the wrong decisions, hopefully being able to see mistakes that were made and to learn from it. So we don't have to go through dumb things. So we don't have to experience really bad things, because what he experienced was pretty tough, pretty thick-headed. And it's an amazing thing, the patience of God, and how sometimes he will work with us when we do have that attitude and thinking and give us a lot of time. I've seen it over and over again in the church. Whether a person repents or not, that's another matter. My experience is not very often. Matter of fact, Very, very, very seldom. That's astonishing. So when it comes to God, God's church, perhaps God's given direction of doing something a certain way to get something done like he did to him and told him, go do this. I think of the ministry in the church who was told to do a certain job, to go out into church areas and teach what they had been taught. And as time went along, as Laodicea got closer, think of the things that took place, and people began to put out their own ideas. Because, you see, they didn't have anyone watching over them like at headquarters anymore. They didn't have anyone teaching them on a regular basis like they did in Ambassador College or wherever it might have been. And so if they're out in the church area, sometimes that attitude of mind gets in there that they're farther out and no one's there, and they can get by with that. And hundreds of ministers did just that. Did something different than what they were told to do and how they were told to do it. I think of the example I've given different times when I gave a charge to some ministers to look for a feast site. We all got together in the beginning, and there was a road in Orlando that they were going to go look for some different areas where we might have the feast site. And I told them, don't go north of Sandy Lake Road. No hotels up there, period, because I knew the area and didn't want God's people to have to be in that kind of an area where you might go out at night and it's not as safe. To find safer areas where God's people could be, and nicer than some of those hotels up there, because some of them were kind of ratty, candidly. Anyway, they went north of Sandy Lake Road. Didn't do what they were asked to do, and some copped a pretty bad attitude over some of it, and in time, God cleaned those things up. And those who were at the forefront, no longer with us. And I believe fully it started as a test at that particular time that led to what finally happened. Anyway, so God gives us things to do and tells us how to do it, and it's up to us to do it faithfully. It doesn't matter where we are. In church areas, people go away. We off to our own homes, our own locations, wherever we live. We're so scattered, we're so far apart, we hardly ever see each other, except sometimes on a Sabbath. Some areas don't get to see anybody at all as a whole. There are some out there who can't travel, and they really don't even get to go to the Feast of Tabernacles because of health issues or whatever it might be, different things that come along. And anyway, what a blessing when we do have that ability, but sometimes we can begin to take some of that for granted, and if we're not careful and start living our own life, our own secret life that's different from what we're supposed to be living when we come together on the Sabbath and we have fellowship with one another. And I've lived through these things. Many of you have lived through some of these things where individuals have come along and they're not being true to what they're really doing during the rest of the week. Similar to Jonah here, not doing what God has given the charge to do. So, concerning Jonah fleeing to Tarshish, again, in southwest Spain, in an area, I'm just going to read part of this because I thought it was interesting history. When we were in that area, we'd planned to have a feast site in some of that region, not too far from there, actually really close. And there's so much history there, not just of the Romans and what they built through time, and the Moors as they came across from northern Africa and did and built things in the region. But going back to the time of the Phoenicians, which is going way, way back, incredible structures and things that were built in the region that they've unearthed. And you think, it's so incredible. Some of the peoples back in those times and what they did, and Phoenicians were known for their incredible knowledge of shipping. And we come up to the time then of, well, we'll come to some of that later here, but I think of the time of King Solomon and King David and some of the routes that they were taking and the shipping that was taking place there, and a lot of it's led out in the beginning by the Phoenicians and the knowledge that they had. So if the area was in southwest Spain, they believe it was on the Iberian Peninsula, an area close to Cadiz, if I'm saying that right, some of these Spanish words, was a great port in that respect, trading area. And they believe that this area of Tarshish was a region, not just necessarily a city. Some believe that there was a city in it as well, but that it was south of the area of Sevilla, or Seville, we would call it in English. And again, in the south and western parts of Spain there. Anyway, going back in that particular time, if it was at that particular time, it had been around the time of the 8th, the 5th century BC. We're going to go back and read a story about Solomon right now, because although this is about Jonah and we're going to look at different lessons, there's a great one here about Solomon that we're going to stop and look at. Because what happened to King Solomon was in a period around 950 BC, and he did a similar sort of thing as Jonah did in time. And to me, this is an incredible story of what Solomon did. So it fits well into the story of what took place as far as that part of the world, because they did get a lot of the silver, a lot of the gold, and other things from that particular region. And some of these things repeat the same thing, that this is where they got it. So part of the reason for going into some of this story as well and then tying them together. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 9. Later on, we'll come back to the story of Jonah. 2 Chronicles chapter 9, we're going to start the story in verse 17. To me, this is a mind-boggling story, what happened to Solomon. It's an incredible story what happened to Jonah too, but Solomon far more so. Moreover, verse 17, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had steps with a footstool of gold, which were fastened to the throne. Now, he continued on soon after David's death, his father's death, and wanted to do what was in David's heart that David couldn't do. And already preparations, David had already stored up incredible amounts of everything as far as the construction needed for the building of the temple of God. And that was in his heart and mind to do that. And it was in Solomon's as his son to follow through and take care of, and to do that as well in the manner that David had and had given to his son. And so from the beginning, incredible riches went into the temple, and we've read about some of those things of recent time and all the work that went into building of the temple. But this is another story that goes on a little bit later in time, things that Solomon continued to build and add to, and you begin to see a shift in his thinking as time goes on here. So in here it says, he made this throne that had steps with a footstool of gold, which were fastened to the throne. There were armrests on both sides of the place of the seat, and two lions stood beside the armrests. So I'm not sure why you'd have a great throne of ivory and then you overlay everything with gold. But anyway, I can't even begin to imagine that, some of the things that were in it. So if that's the proper translation of it, I don't know. But again here, verse 19, 12 lions stood there, one on both sides of the 6 steps. So 6 steps going up to the throne, lions on both sides, on every step. So they weren't small steps, and the lions weren't small. These were incredible. This was a magnificent thing that he was building. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. There was nothing that matched up to what he was actually building and constructing here for himself. You know, sometimes as human beings, this happened a great deal in God's ministry, things can begin to go to your head, and you can begin to be lifted up by it, begin to think yourself important or greater than others. And God lets us, as human beings, either go through some of those kinds of things or learn, so that we so detest that kind of spirit and that kind of attitude. And that's what Jonah is written for. That's what Solomon's story is written for, so we can learn from them so we don't make the same kinds of mistakes. So this is not a good thing that Solomon was doing. He was building up things for his glory, if you will, to be raised up in importance, and had this throne being made for his use. So it says, nothing like this had been done. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest in Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was of silver, because that wasn't good enough. For this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. The nation was so wealthy that silver was considered, big deal. We got a lot of it. Gold, well, that had more value. Kind of like the difference today. What does it hit? $70 for an ounce of silver, and gold's $4,500. Incredible times we live in. What's taking place out there? Then it goes on to say, verse 21, for the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. Things they didn't have in Israel. So southwestern Spain isn't known for its monkeys. Now, maybe they brought them over from Africa and brought them up there by other shipping, and maybe that was still a port area, and maybe they did get them there. I don't know. Or they went farther in Tarshish or somewhere farther down. We don't know. But the point being, still has the same name and same periods of time here. Some of the things, the Phoenician influence and so forth, and the shipping that was taking place, and Hiram that was being used that helped with the temple itself and the building of it from the region he was from. So, again, story about Jonah, and one of those lessons on a spiritual plane ties in directly with what we're reading here about Solomon. About turning away from God and trying to get away from God. 1 Kings chapter 10. Some of these stories go back and forth in 2 Chronicles and 1 Kings here. Now in 1 Kings chapter 10. Because in reality, by the time it was over with, Solomon on a spiritual plane went as far from God as he could. Sometimes in the church, people go as far away from God as they can. Because once you're cut off from God's Spirit and you've known the truth, that's what happens anyway. You're going to go far, far away spiritually. 1 Kings 10, and begin to lose everything that one might have had. Amazing. Truth, gone. Forgetting the holy days when they come, when they are, maybe knowing the feast is in the fall, there's a Passover was sometime in the spring, but even having that knowledge sometimes it's just out of people's lives. They don't care about it. They don't think about it anymore. Incredible. The people who have been in God's church. Astounding. 1 Kings 10, verse 14. So just as Jonah wanted something different, he didn't want God's way. He didn't want to do it God's way. He didn't want what God had given him to do. That's a choice that so many have made throughout time concerning God, period, who have been called to that which is greater. Verse 14, the weight of the gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. Every year, 4 billion, around 4,060,000 pounds every year. Besides that, from the traveling merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the country. So there was more that came in, but this is what came in this manner. Now King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold, and 600 of gold going into each shield. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold, and 3 pounds of gold going into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So it's just going on about the same building, the same thing that was being built, the incredible steps, and then these shields and where they were placed, and the wealth that was there, the magnificence of it on a physical plane. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and on the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood by the armrest. 12 lions stood there, 1 on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the house, or the vessels of the house of Lebanon, were pure gold. So it's just repeating some of the same things, some added a little bit different here at times. Not one was silver, for that was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. For the king had merchant ships of the sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. Verse 23. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. So it's an incredible thing what God had given to Solomon anyway. The mind, the wisdom he was known for, it spread throughout the entire world, the known world at that time, with all the kingdoms and those who came in his presence and because of that, and those who gave, again, gold above and beyond what they had coming in from all the different countries and the riches and so forth that people gave to be an ally. Now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom. So we know some of those stories. Incredible. Queen of Sheba, noted one. Awesome, awesome, awesome. God gave him that mind. God gave him the wisdom. In the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his inner being, if you will, his mind, his heart. So things that people hadn't heard, things that people didn't know, things that came from God, that Solomon told them. Each man brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules, and set a rate year by year. So they did this year by year. It was like a taxation. But from how it's written, it was given more willingly because they wanted to be a part of this. They wanted to be on his side, to be known for that. Now Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. These are his personal things, not just the army itself, but this was for himself in that respect, as to that which would guard him, as to that which would go before him, and so forth, and on and on. Incredible. And you can see how through time here, these things can work on the human mind. I think of Herbert Armstrong, when people tried to applaud him at any feast, and it happened. And he would tell them no. He would tell them no, sit down, don't applaud. He knew it wasn't right. He knew it wasn't good for him and for his own mind if he were to desire that or want that in any fashion. He so hated it, so disliked it, saw the dangers of such things for any human being, that he put a stop to it. And then the other man, Jonah Koch Sr., who always wanted more. Whenever we saw him, he would stop everyone from all their applaud and clapping and standing type of thing, like an ovation at a concert or something, huge. And he would stop them and say, "You can do better." He would raise his arm. He'd do like this. "You can do more. You can do better than that." Right there. A different mind than Herbert Armstrong. Totally different. And Solomon began to develop that kind of a mind. A desire, the praise that he was receiving from kings and kingdoms, of people coming to him and bringing him gold and the like. he had so much anyway, so why go beyond that? But this is his story. The human mind, and to understand that no one is to ever allow haughtiness, that kind of a spirit of pride, to enter in. Pride is something to be hated, to be loathed, to be despised. If you see any trace of it, any smidgen of it in your own mind, it's something to be, you have to learn to abhor it. Because only in abhorring it can you see it better and can you refuse it more quickly. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes people like it because that's the carnal mind. It tells us what we are, what we're subject to. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Has to do with ourselves and how we think about ourselves, how we see things, that we can do something different from the way, that's what it comes down to, than God even tells us, which is what Solomon did. Mind-boggling. That he began to turn against God. Mind-boggling that this has happened to a majority of people who have been called into God's church to become part of a government, a priesthood that is going to serve and help people so much in the millennium and beyond that it would boggle your minds to truly be able to see it for what it is. And the desire for that would be so overwhelming. But we can't see it all that well because we have never experienced it. It's a matter of belief. It's a matter of faith. It's a matter of knowing in the mind of what God gives us to see and understand about our calling and what He's called us to. Nothing of human beings and all the glory they think they can have, that I have done this, I have done that, look how great I am, which today is ringing louder and louder in the world, is sick. It truly is of a sick mind to do those things and to laud them on oneself. We should never do that. And I hope we understand that. Because every once in a while within the church, pride jumps up. I loathe it. I loathe it with all my being. And I hate to see it in others because I know what it does to the mind and how it can destroy. We are not through this yet. We are not past all this yet. Things are happening in the world so quickly that you wonder how can this keep going on much longer? But it's in God's time, and it'll go exactly the time that God has allotted and planned for. But not everyone, even listening today, is going to be there when this all comes to pass. We'll never see individuals who become priests and kings of God. That makes everything that a human being could even think of desiring for themselves in any fashion or form puny as all get out. There is nothing in any leadership of anyone in this world that even comes close to what God is giving to the 144,000. I hope we understand that. It is so much greater, so much more powerful, so much more glorious, what God is offering. And it's not about trying to get that or want that. I mean, we desire that because this is our time to live, yes, but to lust after it, that's another matter. No. It's just a part of what God has said. And as we live, we know that's what we're going to receive. And it's just what it is. Not taken because we think ourselves great and should have it or deserve it, because then we wouldn't get it anyway. God wouldn't give it to such a mind. Anyway, so reading stories like this and seeing what I've seen in the church, it hurts. That's just no other way of explaining it. Of all the thousands of people who've turned from God, who've turned and in their spiritual life to get as far away as they possibly can, because that's what happens. Once they start in that direction, where does it end? Can it ever be reversed? I'm of a great belief, whether right or wrong, that there aren't going to be many. That once they've done that, if any, but very few. That's why repentance is so important while we can, to apply it to our lives, to seek it, to want to change, to want to see our minds transformed, to want to obey God in everything, to want to live His way of life, to want to fight against everything that the carnal mind comes up with or thinks of or has come in thoughts, and to catch those thoughts, to get to a point where the actions don't happen most assuredly, let alone even the thoughts, and to refuse them quickly, just as quick as Herbert Armstrong did when some began to applaud. And he would say, no, no, no. It's the mind, to protect it, to be on guard, to be alert. So again here, pick it up in verse 23 again. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth with riches and wisdom. Now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present, articles of gold, silver, armament, spices, and so forth. I read that anyway, reading it again here. I lost my spot. To be candid with you, it says the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. That's why I was saying here earlier, is just like you go outside, there's some stones, silver, and whatever. Anyway, that's what it's saying here. It was just so common that it wasn't a big deal to have things of silver. People were rich. People were wealthy. People in Jerusalem at that time. Incredible, because they benefited from the wealth of King Solomon and all that he was doing. Incredible what was taking place here. And he made cedar trees abundant of the sycamores which are on the lowland. 1 Kings 11, going on, next chapter here. Because we come to this part, the story of Solomon, how he fled from God. Turned away, just as Jonah turned away, went a different direction. Solomon did so far worse because of what he was given. Verse 1, but King Solomon loved many foreign wives, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Eternal had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. God's purpose on this, some have totally misunderstood things like this, felt like it was a matter of because Israel was to be a pure race. It's not about that at all. It was about those countries and what they believed and what God knew would happen when a woman of a different mind sets out to continue living her way of life, her gods being worshiped, and trying to persuade her husband to do likewise. That's why within the church, no matter what the situation, God's people stand firm in what is true and right, regardless of what the consequences are. People have choices. And so it says here, these were from other nations, whom God said, you shall not intermarry with them, nor with they with you. Surely, see, it goes on to explain why. Surely, this is what's going to happen if you do this. They will turn away your hearts after their gods. This is on a physical plane with a physical carnal people. They weren't called spiritually. They didn't have God's Spirit in their minds. He's dealing with carnal, physical human beings. And so he told them this, don't do this. Solomon clung, or held fast as the word is in Hebrew, clung, he held fast to these in love. He loved a lot of them. Now he had 700 wives. Went a little overboard with the gold, went a little overboard in the places he was building, went a little overboard in this one too. Must have been incredible drama. Anyway. Anyway, princesses and 300 concubines. because there had to be problems amongst them. That's just the way of the human mind. And his wives turned away his heart because he allowed that. He allowed that to begin happening because of the mindset he had toward them, the lust, whatever, all the things that were in him, that he began to want to please them and be pleasing to them. For more than to God. So he compromised a little here, a little there, and it doesn't look like it took a whole lot. It happened pretty fast. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the eternal his God. And I think, because I've seen it again, so much in God's church, some who've been in 30, 40 plus years, and then at the end, when things are coming to a close, or when their lives are nearing an end, and then to turn away from God to something else they want in the world, to turn away from God and move away from God, to move as far away. What is in the human mind to turn away from Joshua the Christ as our Passover? To turn away from obedience to the things we have as holy days, and on it goes, to doctrines that God has given to us to see, to know, and to understand. To turn away from those because we want something different. In other words, we begin to lose those things and the conviction of those things. Because when sin enters in to the mind, if it's not repented of, we begin to quench the spirit. I think of an umbilical cord to a baby. And if you start pinching it off, the blood flow, it leads to death. And that's what happens on a spiritual plane when people begin to quench God's Spirit. And less is able to flow into our life. And eventually then we become totally cut off from God. Incredible. And then on our own, not able to grasp, to see, to understand things on a spiritual plane any longer. Maybe have certain physical knowledge. The seventh day is a Sabbath. But that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people either after a time. So his heart was not loyal to the eternal his God. Why would we want to be anything but loyal to Almighty God? Faithful, loyal. What are we? What kind of a mind do we want? What kind of character do we have? What kind of character do we want? One that's loyal to God, faithful to God, obedient to God, desirous of pleasing God and his son Joshua. Hasn't happened to a majority of the people whom God has called over time. So his heart was not loyal to the eternal, his God, as the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Eternal, and did not fully follow the Eternal. The Hebrew word means, it's not he didn't do fully, he didn't fulfill, he didn't complete what God had given him to do. Just like Jonah. God had him complete the job. But Solomon, he had been called to a greater purpose. He had been given so much of the, truly even of the mind of God. The wisdom that he had, awesome. Things that he wrote about in Scripture, that are Scripture, because that's when God was working with him, and the things that were recorded, that are powerful, that are mighty, that you can read about. But he's not able to enjoy it. He's not able to receive benefit from that because of what he did. So he did not fulfill, accomplish, or complete. That's what the word means in Hebrew. What the Eternal had given to him in that respect. Then Solomon built a high place at Chemosh. This is about child sacrifices. To go that far away from God, that you could offer up a child to be sacrificed to a so-called God, is about the most heinous, putrid, sickening, perverted, distorted thinking, so far away from the wisdom of God that was given to him, that it's night and day in difference. Totally. A high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the people of Ammon, a Canaanite region, again, known especially for child sacrifices. They were very similar as far as the kind of gods they were, just had different names. And then he did likewise for all his foreign wives. He burnt incense and sacrificed to their gods. That's like going back and putting up a tree this time of year in your house. Going to services on the day of the sun. And people, the human mind, they don't know where these things came from. They don't grasp how hideous. Once you've learned the truth and know what the truth is, and to go to those things, to do those things, well, this is what Solomon was doing. Now, this really should boggle everyone's mind in the church of God, that this could have happened, that a man of such stature and wealth and power that was given to him, everything on a silver platter. Well, silver wasn't good enough, was it? Incredible. All that he was given by God. And then to do this toward the end of his life, it boggles the mind, and it doesn't. Because I have witnessed it over and over. Every year I've witnessed it since I've been in God's church. People have done worse, as bad, on a spiritual plane. Because to turn away from the truth, to turn away from what God has given in the mind, the wisdom, the mind of God that we have, because we have the wisdom of God. That's what God has given to us. That's what we're told. The mind, the word that's in our minds, that we're blessed to see and know, the things we can see. Solomon couldn't see it. That we have things the apostles didn't see and couldn't see because it wasn't time for certain things to be given to them yet. And what we're able to see and know, that wisdom, that mind, that word, astounding. And yet every year, people turn from it. Something else is more attractive, or someone else is more attractive. For the short length of time, that little hoorah, whatever it is, that might last for a year, that might last for a few months, whatever it is that someone wants, or whoever it is that someone wants, because this is the number one thing that's happened when people have left. It's over relationships and things that are done wrong against God's law in those relationships. To want that more than God and everything that God has given to us, it's just sick. Like Solomon became sick in his mind. He did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burnt incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the Eternal became angry. Well, they like to use the word angry because they don't know God. And so God lets them do that and has allowed translations to exist with that as well. When we know full well God is not an angry God. God isn't like human beings. Does he punish? Yes. Does he want to punish? Absolutely not. That's not the mind. God and all of God's ways, all of God's laws are based on a love that is beyond that of human beings, that is hard for us to grasp and comprehend. But human beings, especially through the periods of time that mankind has gone, he's allowed individuals to truly be fearful of him, because that's what it took for the carnal human mind. Has to have fear. It's just like today in nations who want to go to war with one another. If they don't fear certain ones enough, they might go to war with them, but if they fear them enough, that's why nuclear weapons have been used as a supposed deterrent in that respect, to deter countries from attacking because of certain power. They don't want that to happen on their continent or their cities and so forth. And so, anyway, the rat race and insanity continues. But those are physical, carnal nations. But for God's people, so the eternal, obviously, fully displeased with their choices. It's like in a family, a close-knit family of parents and children who are close and bound close. And you see, or a parent sees a child grow up to a certain age, and they begin to make choices that are harmful to them, that are not good, that are not right, and what they're doing isn't right. And this tearing that it can do inside the heart, inside the mind, because you don't want to see them suffer. And yet there are times where you have to take a stand because they can't be allowed to continue doing the things they're doing. So you have to make certain choices as to how to deal with that. How do you think God works with us as human beings? He loves us. He doesn't want us to do things that are going to hurt others or hurt ourselves, to hurt the mind, and on it goes. So we should be able to understand some of these things to a degree in that respect. So God becomes displeased when people make the wrong choices. Parents become displeased. Doesn't mean they're angry and raging in anger. They love. Who doesn't love their own child? To a point they want to sacrifice for them or willing to sacrifice for them, whatever it takes. God's been doing that for 6,000 years and long before, making sacrifice for his plan and purpose. Joshua the Christ. Anyway, so the eternal, again, displeased with Solomon. Wish he hadn't made that choice. Wish he hadn't decided, but he didn't prevent him. God doesn't force his way down our throat. That's not free choice. It can't be us then. We can't become what is right and good unless we choose it and want it and cry out for it. But if we don't want it, it's like forcing a child to go to services when they hate it. They loathe it, and in time, they have such hatred for going to Sabbath services that in time they just so hate it that they turn against the parents in those things. I've seen those kinds of things happen. You think, so what do you do? How do you deal with it? Do you force them to go against their will? And they're making all kinds of big scenes and stink about it and the like and doing some pretty ugly things as a result of it? Well, sometimes parents have forced their child to go. I've seen children at age 12 and 13, their minds are set. They're set. They do not want this. You cannot force it down their throat. And some people have had to make some pretty tough choices because of that at times in their life. It's horrible to experience it. But you know what? Everybody has to experience the pain in the mind of having a friend, a close friend, perhaps a close relative, perhaps a parent, a child, whatever it might be, who will not choose this way of life. We all have had friends, close friends, who have chosen to go some other course. It hurts. You don't want to see them make that choice. They're going to hurt themselves immensely so they don't grasp what they're doing, the depth of what they've done. So it's that kind of a mind that it hurts when it sees someone else make a wrong choice. And that's what happened here with God toward Solomon. God hurt. God is hurt when people make the wrong choice. Who wants to see? God has a greater love for us as human beings than we could ever have. to anyone else. An unselfish love. We as human beings generally have some selfishness mixed in there, a lot. Maybe because it's our own or whatever. Whatever. But with God, it's, especially when He's called someone and opened up their minds and we become begotten. We actually become His children once we're begotten of His Holy Spirit. Before that, we're just human beings without any hope. We're going to live and we're going to die. Thankfully, God has a plan and time. Everyone has the opportunity to become a child, to become baptized, to receive the impregnation of God's Holy Spirit, to become a child of God. And the love that God has when He gives that to anyone is far beyond anything a human being has toward their own children or anyone else in life. And so we learn through the process something that really hurts. Not everyone wants what God is offering. I marvel at that, how God's shown that more in the past 3 years than ever before, and even in the great white throne. How many come through it all? It's not going to be what we have thought in times past, because we thought that was the time, candidly, that most would come through it. It may well be that the most will not come through it. Just like within the church, most haven't come through it, who've been offered this way of life. Since they refused it, are they owed it? What do they deserve now? Another sacrifice of Christ? Is that how it works? What does it take? How can it happen that way? That question is asked in Scripture, basically. So we have to be sobered by stories like this. We have to be sobered. We should be sobered by things that Jonah did. We should be sobered by things that Solomon did, because people in God's church, even up to the end, can still fall, can still make a choice that destroys them. Self-destructive, turning away from God, running in the opposite direction as fast as they can. Again, please understand, it's happened every year I've been in God's church. It's happened in every year since it started, back in the days of Paul, back in the days of the disciples, when they begin to realize people are turning away from the truth. Incredible. So the Eternal, in essence, was indeed fully displeased. Hurt by, if you will, with Solomon, because his heart had turned from the eternal God of Israel. It's not a pleasant experience. It's a horrible one, just as much as it is for anyone in the church, except far worse in God's presence or in God's mind, in God's life, because His love is far greater. Who had appeared to him twice. Awesome. And had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. You know, when someone was made a king, a lot of human beings just couldn't handle that, who were a part of something God was offering, let alone the leaders of the world, because they definitely can't handle it. But anyway, it's just a way of life with human beings. So God warned him, be careful, because this is what can happen to you. He warns us over and over again, be careful, because this can happen. But he did not keep what the Eternal had commanded. Choices, choices, choices. God doesn't force us to make choices. He says, here it is. Choice is yours. What do you want? I marvel at that when God simplifies it and said, this day I've set before you life and death. It's kind of a no-brainer. Choose life. But human beings, we deceive ourselves and don't believe certain things and go off and do what we want to do, and how long we have left to do it. Whatever age we might be, or never know when someone's going to get killed in a car wreck or something else happen in life that people die, or maybe it just is old age. But so many in their old age in the worldwide church of God didn't have much time left and turned against God, massively so, by the tens of thousands. Astounding. Therefore the Eternal said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant. So we've just gone through a series about the oath we made. We entered into a covenant agreement with God that we said we wanted and desired what he was offering us. And we made that agreement, that oath with him, that we would follow him, that Christ indeed is our Lord and our teacher. All the truth comes through him to us, given by God. Have not kept my covenant and my statutes, because that goes with it, God's way of life, to live it, to be obedient to it, which I have commanded you. I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Israel and Judah suffered mightily because of what Solomon did. Because of the kingdom splitting up after that, Jeroboam and Rehoboam and the things that took place there, and Jeroboam to the north and the 12 tribes that separated. Well, 10 tribes. 10 tribes that separated in the north. And then Judah was primarily the one left in the south, with a large contingent then of Levi. Not a lot left. Totally split up. Wars that took place as a result of it. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father, David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son, primarily then speaking of the tribe of Judah, the Jewish people. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So even on a physical plane, it was still to be there, it was still to be known, and through time, that location, that place, thankfully in God's church, he's let us understand the spiritual meaning of those things, what it means to have Jerusalem and be a part of something that is incredibly great. Let's go back now to Jonah. So again here, the admonition, the realization, the soberness to grasp and comprehend that we always have choices in front of us, day by day by day, as to whether God is first in our lives, as to whether or not we fight for that and desire that and ask for that and cry out for that, because we know we need that and we're told to do that because we know what we are. We see how weak we really are as human beings, and that we can't do this without God's help, and we can't keep what he's given to us without his help every day of our lives. And so we fight that fight. We've chosen to fight that. We want that. And to not let sin cut us off from that. So we fight. The greatest battle we have, our own minds. It's not others. It's our own mind. It's never anyone else's fault. It's only our fault when we make wrong choices. Incredible. Jonah 1, let's read it again. Now the word of the Eternal came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up to me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Eternal. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, and so paid the fare and went down to it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Eternal. Going on then, verse 4. But the Eternal sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. You going across the Mediterranean like that? Incredible storms. We see some of the things that happened to Paul and how he'd been shipwrecked and the things that happened to him. And some of the incredible storms that can come up there and destroy the kinds of ships. It didn't matter what kind of ships they had. It could destroy them. Most assuredly God could. Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God. What do human beings do when they're on the edge of death and they've lost their own power and ability to control their environment? It's like the old story about being in the foxhole, that all of a sudden you'd be praying and promising everything to God. If He'll just bring you through it, I'll do this and I'll do that. And, then you get out and life goes back to whatever. But so this is what they did, very carnal in thinking, and all of a sudden they're crying out to their gods with all that they know, because this is far greater than them, and they know that death is right there in front of them. And they threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea. That's not a small thing to do, because that's your pay. There it goes. You're going to receive payment from all these things that are being sold and being delivered to other areas. So they did it to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest part of the ship and had laid down, and was fast asleep. Pretty good sleeper. But God allowed this to happen, to take place. And that was kind of his mind and his attitude, to be separate from everything else and not let anything bother him. He's just getting away from God. He's just glad to not have to go to Nineveh. He's on his way. And he doesn't realize what's taking place above board and how the panic is taking place. And so he's asleep. So the captain came to him and said to him, "Why are you sleeping? Arise, call on your God. Everyone else is." It's like, how on earth could you be asleep? Anyway, perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish. Carnal human thinking. If maybe those other gods don't help out, maybe yours will. Cry out. Now they said one to another, "Come, let us cast lots so that we may know for whose cause this trouble has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So God allowed this, allowed it to indicate the one who's responsible because of his choices of what had come upon the ship. Then they said to him, "Please tell us, for whose cause is this trouble upon us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" So they were wanting to know, why you? This is happening because of you? They want to know more about him. So he said to them, "I am a Hebrew." I'm sure that went over well. "And I fear the Eternal, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Well, let's just throw it all in there. Anyway, you got to see some of the humor in some of these things. Then the men were exceedingly afraid because of what they were experiencing, because of what he said, and because of what he claimed. And things that have happened to Israel, to the Jews, to the Hebrews, if you will, wasn't a big secret. History of things that have happened and nations that have come up against them and the things that God has done, those were things that were passed down amongst people. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "Why have you done this?" For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Eternal, because he told them. So it came out as they were going through this. Other men said, this is what he said. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea might calm for us?" For the sea was growing more tempestuous. Then he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea." So he's willing to be thrown overboard, die at that point. He's not escaping God. He sees now what's taking place. Their ship's about to be broken up. They've thrown everything over. They probably really would like to kill him. And so I might as well just get it over with quickly. It doesn't take long when you're floating around there and you can't swim and life is gone. You're just there for a little bit. Not a lot of suffering like some people have to go through in life before they die. So that's what he chose. Just throw me overboard. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, then the sea will become calm for you." Because he knew why this was happening. He knew what was taking place. He knew that God was doing this. It was given to him to know. "For I know that this great tempest is because of me." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not, for the sea continued to grow more tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried out to the Eternal and said, We pray, O Eternal, please do not let us perish for this man's life, and do not charge us with innocent blood, for you, O Eternal, have done as it pleased you. Incredible, their response, and not calling on their gods now, but they're calling on his God and acknowledging here that this is why this is happening, and don't lay this on innocent blood because we didn't do what he did. So they picked up Jonah. They finally came to that point. They tried not to. They didn't want to be responsible for someone's death, but came to that point that if this is what it takes, if this is what we're supposed to do, and the sea will be calm because of it, then we're going to do it. So they turned from not wanting to do it at that point to doing it, even though I'm sure there were some in that group that weren't as kind and nice toward him, knowing human nature. So they picked Jonah up, threw him in the sea, and the sea ceased from raging. What an incredible thing to happen. If you were on that ship, and all of a sudden it stops. Might think about changing the gods. Anyway, maybe we ought to go back to Israel. Anyway. Verse 16. Then the men feared the Eternal exceedingly, and offered sacrifice to the Eternal, and took vows. So it was over with. It wasn't like being in the foxhole because now it was calm, but they followed through. Now the Eternal had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. Then Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Incredible story. We're going to stop there today. Incredible story here, and how that it's even used by Christ and by God, obviously, given to Christ as an example that this is how long he would be in the tomb. And people don't place importance on it like they should, like it's being talked about in times past, but also in this book in a more succinct way than ever. 3 days and 3 nights. Not a day and a half, not dying on Friday and being resurrected Sunday morning. He said the only proof he was going to leave that he was the Messiah was that he would be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Incredible what God has given us to see and understand and grasp, and to know how true, how awesome that is, to understand the timing of everything that took place. So succinctly so that we know that he was resurrected on a Sabbath day. At the end of that Sabbath day, just before sunset, going back 3 days from the time he was put in the tomb to that point in time, exactly 3 days and 3 nights. And to so blow out of the water any understanding or thinking that he was resurrected that following morning, and why people are so stubborn. Mankind, there was one that finally acknowledged it, only one, what would you call them, a type of television evangelist, very well known, who finally acknowledged it was 3 days and 3 nights. Now, how they addressed it and how he addressed it with his congregation, because people believe in a Good Friday, and I'm not sure what was good about it, but anyway, if that was true, and Sunday morning resurrection. And yet every account is that when they went to the tomb, he'd already been resurrected. He's not here. Anyway, how blessed are we that these things are simple to us? They should be very simple to everyone to understand 3 days and 3 nights. Even a scattered church. There are large portions of ministers before they even scattered who believed in a 14th, 15th Passover. Absolutely no excuse, once you know the truth, to have gone that route, to not understand what Christ was saying. How blessed are you? Do we grasp the kind of wisdom, the kind of mind that God has given us to see the things we see? And yet this year, there will still be some who don't go to the Feast of Tabernacles because they're no longer a part of God's church. Every year this happens. I'd like to have 1 year where it didn't, but it's not going to happen that way. Don't let it be you. Remember Solomon. Remember Jonah.